What if something you eat every day is slowly damaging your brain and heart, and you don't even know it? Jessica Green sat in her doctor's office, eyes wide, trying to process the words that were echoing in her mind. She'd always considered herself a healthy person, conscious of what she ate, how often she exercised, and even how much sleep she got. At 65, she'd never thought she'd be having a conversation like this. But here she was, about to hear a truth that would shake everything she believed about her health. The small, sterile room seemed to grow colder as Dr. Heller leaned forward, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. She'd been Jessica's doctor for years, but the serious look on her face was something Jessica wasn't used to seeing. "Jessica, I need you to listen carefully," Dr. Heller continued, her voice measured but firm. "I've been reviewing your test results and, frankly, I'm concerned. There are signs of early cognitive decline, and I suspect your diet may be playing a significant role." Jessica felt her heart skip a beat. Cognitive decline? Was she losing her mind? "Don't panic," Dr. Heller quickly added, sensing the panic in Jessica's eyes. "But I need you to stop eating certain foods immediately. Specifically, there are some nuts that you may think are healthy but could actually be contributing to your symptoms." The room seemed to close in on Jessica. Nuts? The very thing she thought was a healthy snack, a handful of almonds here, a few cashews there, were now being blamed for her slipping memory and increasing heart palpitations. How could this be? "What do you mean? What nuts?" Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Heller sighed and flipped through the pages of Jessica's medical chart. "You've been consuming a variety of nuts, walnuts, cashews, peanuts, and Brazil nuts, thinking they were boosting your brain and heart health. But in reality, these nuts contain fats and compounds that, in excessive amounts, can be harmful. They've been linked to memory issues, fatigue, and even heart problems." Jessica blinked, trying to grasp what Dr. Heller was saying. She had always prided herself on her eating habits. She wasn't the kind of person who snacked on chips or soda. Instead, she'd made a point to have a handful of nuts every day, convinced they were the perfect source of nutrients. "But they're supposed to be healthy," Jessica murmured, her thoughts racing. Dr. Heller nodded sympathetically. "I know. They're commonly marketed as brain-boosting superfoods. And for some people, they may offer some benefits. But in your case, it seems these particular nuts are having the opposite effect. You need to avoid them for a while and focus on other foods that can support your cognitive and cardiovascular health." Jessica's mind was spinning. How could she have gotten this so wrong? All these years of taking pride in her diet, and now this? A whole new set of rules she had to follow. The weight of it all settled heavily on her chest. She could feel the beginnings of a headache creep up from behind her eyes. "Okay," Jessica finally said, her voice shaky. "But what should I eat instead? What can I do to make this right?" Dr. Heller's face softened, a knowing smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "That's the good news. There are 4 specific nuts that are incredibly beneficial for both brain and heart health. I want you to start incorporating these into your diet: almonds, pistachios, hazelnuts, and macadamia nuts." Jessica frowned. Pistachios and hazelnuts? I never really liked those. And macadamia nuts, aren't they high in fat? They are high in healthy fats, which is exactly what your body needs, Dr. Heller explained. These nuts are packed with antioxidants, good fats, and vitamins that support brain function and cardiovascular health. And when consumed in moderation, they can help you feel better, think clearer, and reduce your risk of heart disease. Jessica nodded slowly, feeling a mix of hope and confusion. She wasn't sure if she was ready to give up the nuts she loved. Walnuts and cashews had been a staple in her diet for years. But if there was a chance this could help her feel better, she was willing to try. Dr. Heller handed Jessica a list of foods to avoid and another list of foods to incorporate. "I'll schedule a follow-up appointment in a month. Let's see how you do with this new plan." As Jessica left the office, the world outside felt strangely distant. The sunlight streamed through the trees, but Jessica's mind was elsewhere, on the task ahead. She'd always been someone who took charge of her own life. This wasn't going to be any different. If this new diet could improve her health, she would make it happen. But as she drove home, doubts began to creep in. Was she really prepared to change so much of her daily routine? Nuts had been a part of her life for decades. She'd always eaten a handful as a snack or sprinkled them over her salads. Could she really let go of the foods that had become so familiar? Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her son, Mark. "Mom, how did the appointment go? Everything okay?" Jessica smiled softly, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she typed a response. "Doctor says I need to change my diet. No more walnuts, cashews, peanuts, or Brazil nuts. Instead, I need to eat almonds, pistachios, hazelnuts, and macadamia nuts. Apparently, the first four were messing with my brain and heart." Mark's response was immediate. "What? That's crazy. Are you sure? You've been eating those nuts for years." Jessica chuckled softly to herself. It was hard to believe, even for her. She hadn't even realized how reliant she'd become on those 4 nuts, or how much they had shaped her daily life. "Yeah, I know. I'm still processing it all. But I'm going to give it a shot. I'll let you know how it goes." As Jessica put her phone down and drove through the streets of her neighborhood, the sense of uncertainty that had settled in her chest began to ease. There was hope in the air. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the turning point she'd been waiting for. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of excitement. She wasn't sure how she was going to navigate this new path, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to give up. If this was the key to feeling better, to living longer, she was going to find a way. But the question still lingered. What if this simple change could truly make all the difference? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jessica Green had always been the type of person who took charge of her own health. From the moment she stepped into her 60s, she made a promise to herself: age was just a number. It was a mantra she lived by. After retiring as a nutritionist at the age of 60, Jessica felt like she had entered a new chapter of life. But even in retirement, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had more to offer the world, more to learn, more to give, and certainly more to live for. Her husband, Carl, had passed away 2 years ago after a long battle with cancer. His death left a hole in her heart that she hadn't fully processed yet. She missed him, more than words could express. But Jessica, ever the optimist, chose not to dwell on the loss. Instead, she kept herself busy with community work, visiting her children, and, of course, tending to her beloved garden. She would plant flowers in the spring and vegetables in the summer, always feeling a sense of accomplishment as she watched the plants grow. The garden was her sanctuary, a space where she could meditate on her memories of Carl, and at the same time, cultivate something new. Jessica's children, Mark and Sarah, were both grown and living their own lives, but they always kept in touch, especially since Carl's passing. Mark, her oldest, was married and had 2 kids of his own, while Sarah, her youngest, lived a few hours away with her fiancé. Despite the distance, Jessica's family was the bedrock of her life. She often hosted Sunday dinners at her house, and while they had their disagreements now and then, there was always love at the table. Family meant everything to her. But recently, Jessica had started to feel like she was losing control of something she valued deeply: her health. The warning signs had been subtle at first. Forgetting a name here, misplacing her keys there. She'd chuckled at herself and blamed it on stress, or maybe just the natural process of aging. She never imagined that something as innocent as the nuts she consumed daily could be part of the problem. But here she was, sitting in Dr. Heller's office, learning that the very food she had trusted to keep her healthy were now a cause for concern. Jessica's mind wandered back to her years as a nutritionist. She had spent so much of her career advising others on what to eat to stay healthy. She had worked in clinics, helped families plan healthy meals, and even given talks about the importance of balanced diets. She was known for her no-nonsense approach to food, telling people to skip the fad diets and focus on the basics: fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, and healthy fats. But this felt different. This was about her. The woman who had spent decades telling people what was best for them, now needed to figure out what was best for herself. But it wasn't just her career that shaped Jessica's views on food and health. It was the memories of Carl, too. Carl had been the one to introduce her to the world of healthy eating, long before it became mainstream. He had been passionate about whole foods, the kind of person who would insist that their vegetables were organic, their meat grass-fed, and their grains whole. He'd read every health book he could find, always eager to learn more. Jessica had laughed at his enthusiasm in the beginning, but over time, she had adopted his mindset, believing wholeheartedly in the power of nutrition. After Carl's passing, Jessica's commitment to health became even more pronounced. It was as if she needed the consistency of a balanced diet to anchor her in a world that felt increasingly uncertain. She worked out every morning, went for brisk walks in the park, and always made time for a nutritious breakfast. She had cut out most processed foods and believed that her dedication to wholesome meals was one of the reasons she had remained so spry, even in her 60s. But lately, Jessica had been feeling a shift. Her energy was flagging. There were mornings when getting out of bed felt like a chore. Her joints ached in ways they never had before, and she found herself needing more naps than usual. Worst of all, the forgetfulness was becoming more frequent. Misplacing her keys, struggling to remember names at family gatherings, and, worst of all, feeling disoriented when she was out for a walk in the neighborhood. She had chalked it up to aging, a natural part of life. But now, sitting in Dr. Heller's office, she couldn't help but wonder if it was more than that. Her doctor had given her a wake-up call, and it had shaken her to her core. Dr. Heller's words had felt like a slap in the face, yet there was a part of Jessica that knew she couldn't ignore them. The truth was, for years, Jessica had prided herself on her knowledge of nutrition, but there were always new studies, new discoveries, new things to learn. And this, she realized, was her chance to grow again. As Jessica left Dr. Heller's office, she felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. What would this change mean for her? Could she really give up the nuts she had relied on for years, and would it even help? And beyond that, how could she go back to her family and tell them that she needed to change her entire diet? Her son, Mark, would probably be supportive, but Sarah? Well, Sarah had always been the skeptic when it came to anything that deviated from the norm. Jessica could already imagine Sarah's response: "What? You're giving up walnuts now?" She thought about Carl, and the way he had always been open to new ideas about health, even when they seemed unconventional. Maybe this was the same, just another chapter in her life where she would have to embrace change, just as Carl had. The uncertainty lingered, but Jessica's resolve began to build. This was her life. Her health. If there was a chance, just a chance, that changing her diet could help her live longer, more fully, then she was willing to give it a try. As she made her way home, Jessica's mind started racing. She began to think about the changes she would make. What could she add to her meals to replace the nuts she was supposed to avoid? How could she make this transition without feeling deprived? And more importantly, would it really work? The answers weren't clear yet, but one thing was for sure: Jessica was no longer willing to sit idly by and watch as her health deteriorated. She was going to take control, just like she always had. And this time, she was going to make sure that the changes she made were the right ones for her. For the first few days after her appointment, Jessica felt a strange mix of determination and disbelief. The list from Dr. Heller, filled with her new dietary restrictions and guidelines, was sitting on the counter, staring at her like a challenge. No walnuts, cashews, peanuts, or Brazil nuts. Instead, almonds, pistachios, hazelnuts, and macadamia nuts. But as she went through her daily routine, it wasn't so easy to put those changes into practice. Every time she reached for a snack, her hand instinctively went for the familiar walnut or a handful of cashews. The habits she'd spent years cultivating were hard to break, and she found herself battling old habits at every turn. Jessica had always prided herself on being strong-willed, especially when it came to health. But this felt different. Her food choices had always been tied to comfort, to stability. Carl had been the one to bring nuts into their home, always encouraging healthy snacks and meals. It wasn't just about the nutrition, it was about the memories they'd created together. Every time she popped a Brazil nut into her mouth, it felt like a piece of their shared life. But now, those memories were being challenged. The very foods she thought were helping her were now doing harm, or so Dr. Heller said. And Jessica had always trusted Dr. Heller, who had guided her through health changes in the past. But trusting the doctor was one thing, making the change was another. It wasn't just the nuts that were troubling her. The diet overhaul felt like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. What about her beloved oatmeal in the mornings, where she sprinkled a handful of cashews and walnuts for texture? How could she continue her nightly routine of watching her favorite shows with a small bowl of mixed nuts, only to have to discard everything she knew? It felt like a loss. A part of Jessica wanted to argue with Dr. Heller's advice. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe the nuts weren't really causing the problems. She'd always believed they were healthy. They were a source of protein, fiber, healthy fats, everything she needed to stay energized. How could something so simple be so harmful? One morning, after a sleepless night of worrying about the changes ahead, Jessica made herself a cup of tea and sat down at her kitchen table. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow across the room. She felt exhausted, her mind raced as she thought about what she'd read online the night before. Articles praising the benefits of walnuts and cashews for heart health. Scientific studies that listed all the reasons why nuts should be a part of any diet. But then, a new thought emerged. Maybe she wasn't the only one struggling with this. Maybe others had faced the same dilemma and found their way through it. Maybe this wasn't just about diet, it was about finding new ways to cope with life's unexpected twists. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Sarah. "Hey Mom, how's it going with the new diet? Are you okay?" Jessica stared at the message for a moment, unsure how to respond. She didn't want to sound like she was overreacting, but she wasn't sure she could fully explain the whirlwind of emotions she was feeling. So instead, she simply typed. "It's tough. Giving up nuts I've had for years is harder than I thought. But I'm trying to make it work." Sarah's response came almost immediately. "You've got this, Mom. I know it's tough, but I'm sure it's for the best. Let me know if you need any recipes. I've been experimenting with some new healthy dishes myself." Jessica smiled at her daughter's encouragement. It was always a relief to hear from Sarah, especially when she felt like she was swimming against the tide. But the challenge wasn't just about finding new recipes. It was about letting go of something familiar, something that had been part of her daily routine for years. She wasn't just fighting against her body's need for certain foods, she was fighting against her emotions, her attachments, and her memories. It wasn't easy. For the next few days, Jessica threw herself into the task of changing her diet. She replaced the walnuts with almonds, swapped the cashews for pistachios, and tossed the Brazil nuts for macadamia nuts. It wasn't a seamless transition. At times, she felt frustrated and overwhelmed. She missed the taste of the nuts she had eaten so often and began questioning whether she was doing the right thing. The first time she tried a pistachio, she grimaced. It wasn't the same. It wasn't the comfort of a walnut or the smoothness of a cashew. But slowly, as the days passed, she noticed something: her energy was improving. The fog she had been living in, the one that clouded her mind and left her feeling sluggish, was beginning to lift. Her thoughts felt clearer, sharper, like a fog dissipating after a storm. Still, there were moments when Jessica doubted herself. She was used to thinking of herself as a strong, self-sufficient woman. But this felt like a vulnerability she wasn't prepared to face. She didn't like feeling like she was at the mercy of a doctor's orders or a new health trend. What if Dr. Heller was wrong? What if she was making a huge mistake? That doubt came to a head one evening. Jessica was preparing her dinner, sautéing vegetables with a sprinkling of almonds, when her son Mark called. "Hey, Mom. How's the new diet going?" Jessica paused, the sizzling sound from the pan filling the silence. "It's complicated," she admitted, unsure how to explain the mix of frustration and confusion she felt. "I'm sticking with it, but I'm not sure if it's working. I miss the old nuts. I miss how simple everything used to be." Mark's voice softened. "I get it, Mom. Change is hard, especially when it feels like you've been doing something for so long and it's all of a sudden not good for you. But remember, you've always been about doing what's best for you. If this diet is going to make you feel better, then stick with it. You've got this." Jessica's heart swelled with gratitude. His words felt like a lifeline, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this journey. Maybe the change wasn't going to be as smooth as she had hoped. Maybe it wasn't going to be easy. But if there was a chance it would help her feel better, clearer, more energized, then she was willing to push through the discomfort. And so, as she sat down to her dinner that night, a plate full of vegetables and almonds, she realized something important. Change wasn't just about food, it was about resilience. It was about being able to adapt, to pivot, to evolve. It was about the courage to let go of what was familiar and trust that something better was waiting. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a while, Jessica felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this challenge would lead her to a healthier, brighter future. The transition wasn't easy. There were days when Jessica felt like giving up, when the desire for her old snacks was almost overpowering. There were mornings when she stared at her breakfast of oatmeal topped with almonds and thought, "Is this really worth it?" But as time passed, something unexpected began to happen. She started feeling different. Better, even. It had been 2 weeks since she had made the drastic change in her diet. Jessica was still trying to adjust, but there were small victories to celebrate. Her energy was improving. She was no longer feeling the constant fatigue that had once followed her from morning to night. The brain fog was lifting, and she found herself being more alert, more engaged. It wasn't a complete transformation, but the changes were noticeable. And for someone who had spent years helping others make healthy choices, these improvements were hard to ignore. One evening, after a long day of gardening and grocery shopping, Jessica sat down to a quiet dinner. It was her favorite meal: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and a side of quinoa. As she ate, she couldn't help but think about how much her life had changed in such a short time. The idea of having to give up the nuts she loved had felt like a personal loss at first, but now she realized that her journey wasn't just about giving something up, it was about discovering new ways to nurture her body. But there was still something she couldn't shake: the fear of the unknown. Yes, her body felt better, but the lingering question remained: was this enough? Would it really make a difference in the long term? And most pressing of all, was she doing enough to keep her mind sharp and her heart healthy? In those quiet moments, when Jessica found herself lost in thought, the weight of her decision seemed heavier. She couldn't ignore that she was no longer just playing a passive role in her health, she was actively shaping it. She thought about Carl. How much he had believed in the power of food, in its ability to transform lives. He would have been proud of her for trying something new, for not just accepting what came her way, but for challenging herself. But would the change stick? Jessica couldn't deny that part of her was skeptical. There had to be more she could do. She began researching more, spending hours on the computer late into the night. She read articles, watched videos from health experts, and looked for inspiration from others who had made similar changes. The more she learned, the more she began to realize that this new diet was just the beginning. Then, one afternoon, while at the park on one of her regular walks, Jessica ran into her old friend, Lila. Lila was a former colleague who had also been very into health and wellness. They had shared many conversations about nutrition and the importance of maintaining good habits. Jessica hadn't seen her in months, and they immediately caught up, exchanging news about their families and lives. Lila looked at her with surprise when she saw what Jessica had in her shopping basket: pistachios, hazelnuts, and almonds. "Wow, Jessica, I didn't know you'd gone full-on healthy nut replacement," she said with a laugh. "I thought walnuts were your thing." Jessica laughed too, but there was a nervous energy in her smile. "I'm still adjusting," she admitted. Dar. Heller said I needed to cut out the walnuts and a few others because they were contributing to my health issues. So I'm trying something new. The whole idea of brain and heart health. I have to admit, it's a bit overwhelming. Lila nodded sympathetically, her brow furrowing. It's tough to make those changes, I get it. But if anyone can do it, it's you. I know how seriously you've always taken your health. And listen, my sister tried a similar thing a few years ago. She swapped her nuts around, cut out the bad ones, and added some others in. It was hard at first, but she says she feels better than ever now. Jessica's interest peaked at the mention of someone who had gone through something similar. Did she see any real changes? She asked. Yeah, she actually did. She said her energy levels improved, and she felt more focused. But the key was really sticking with it, especially when it got tough. She had to be patient with herself. As they talked more, Jessica realized that the struggle she was experiencing wasn't unique. Change, real change, was never easy. But it was possible. And it required more than just swapping out foods. It was about embracing the process, trusting the journey, and believing that each small step forward was a victory. That conversation with Lila planted a seed in Jessica's mind. It wasn't just about replacing certain nuts with others. It wasn't about the physical act of changing her diet, it was about the mindset she brought to it. If she could trust the process and believe in the potential of what she was doing, she could make this work. But she would have to let go of her old expectations and fears. A week later, Jessica found herself back in Dr. Heller's office for a follow-up appointment. She walked in feeling more confident than she had in weeks. There were still moments of doubt, but the physical improvements she had noticed were enough to give her hope. "How are we feeling?" Dar. Heller asked, peering over his glasses as Jessica sat down. "Better," Jessica said with a small smile. "Definitely better. My energy is up, and I'm thinking more clearly. I'm sticking with the new nuts, though I won't lie, it's been a challenge. But I think I'm starting to get the hang of it." Dr. Heller smiled, nodding in approval. "Good. This is a journey, Jessica. It's not about instant results. It's about consistency. It's about making small changes over time that have a lasting impact on your health. And from what you're telling me, you're on the right track." Jessica felt a sense of pride at those words. She wasn't done yet, there was still more to learn, more to experience, but for the first time in a while, she felt hopeful. This was more than just a diet change. It was a reminder that she had the power to take control of her health, to face the challenges of aging head-on. The next few weeks flew by. As Jessica continued her new eating habits, she felt more empowered, more alive. She made adjustments to her meals, finding new ways to incorporate the nuts she had learned to love. And each time she saw a positive change in herself, whether it was a burst of energy or a clearer thought, she felt a little more proud of herself. But the real turning point came when Jessica went to visit Sarah for the weekend. As they spent time together, Sarah noticed something different about her mom. "Mom, you look amazing," Sarah said with a smile. "You seem so much more energetic. What's been going on?" Jessica smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "I've been making some changes. It's not easy, but I think it's working. I'm starting to feel like myself again. And for Jessica Green, that was the most powerful discovery of all. Sometimes, the journey to feeling better wasn't about looking for a quick fix. It was about trusting yourself, staying consistent, and never being afraid to evolve. Weeks had passed since Jessica's conversation with Lila, and as the season slowly shifted from spring to summer, so did her approach to health. While her diet changes were becoming second nature, the emotional weight of it all lingered in unexpected ways. There was a lingering question, one that crept into her thoughts when she least expected it: was this enough? Her life had always been about taking charge, doing everything she could to improve herself. But now, with every small change in her daily routine, she couldn't help but wonder whether it was enough to truly combat the aging process and the creeping health issues she had been warned about. The idea of improving her brain and heart health with food was comforting, but the nagging feeling remained. Could it really reverse years of neglect? Could it truly have the profound impact Dr. Heller and others had promised? Her thoughts spiraled when she received a call that would shake her belief in the diet, and herself, once again. It was a Friday evening, and Jessica had just finished preparing a meal of salmon, quinoa, and roasted vegetables. Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up absent-mindedly. The name on the screen made her stomach drop: Carl. Carl. Even after all these years, after the years of life she had lived without him, she could never get used to his name appearing on her phone. They hadn't spoken in a long time. The last time they had exchanged words was at his sister's wedding, a brief, uncomfortable encounter that left her feeling awkward. Carl had been part of her past, part of the life she had built before everything fell apart. But tonight, his call brought back so many feelings, ones she had tried to bury for so long. Taking a deep breath, Jessica answered, trying to steady her voice. "Hello. Jessica, it's Carl." His voice was soft, a little hesitant. "I know it's been a while, but I wanted to check in. How have you been?" There was a moment of silence as Jessica processed the unexpected call. She hadn't anticipated hearing from him, but she couldn't deny the stirring in her chest. "I'm doing okay," she said, her voice steady, though her emotions were anything but. "How about you?" Carl let out a small laugh. "I'm surviving. I've been keeping busy. You know how it is." But Jessica could sense there was more behind his words, a heaviness that seemed to linger beneath the surface. "What's going on, Carl?" He paused for a long time before speaking again. "I've been thinking about you. About us. About everything we used to have. And, honestly, I don't know what happened. I guess I didn't realize how much I missed you, until now." Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't what I expected, she thought, her mind racing. The years of silence, of moving forward, of learning to live without him, suddenly felt like they had come crashing down around her. She hadn't prepared for this. Hadn't prepared for the flood of emotions, the questions, the longing. "Carl, her words faltered. What was she supposed to say? That she had moved on? That she had learned to live without him? Or was she supposed to admit that a part of her still wondered what might have been? "I know things ended badly," Carl continued, his voice quiet. "But maybe it's not too late to fix things, Jess. Maybe we could start over." The world seemed to stop in that moment. The dinner she had prepared, the calm evening she had been looking forward to, all faded into the background. What he was asking, what he was offering, was a chance at something she hadn't considered in years. And, as much as she had tried to move on, as much as she had convinced herself that she was fine on her own, there was a part of her that wasn't ready to let go. A part that still ached for the life they had shared. But Jessica had been on a journey, one that had brought her to this moment. She had learned so much about herself in the past few weeks, about her own strength, about the power of resilience. She had fought to rebuild her health, and she wasn't going to let the past derail her progress. She had to be strong. She had to focus on what was best for her, now. "I'm sorry, Carl," she said softly, her voice trembling just a little. I think we've both changed. I've changed. I can't go back to what we had. I can't go back to that life. There was a long pause, and Jessica could almost feel the weight of his disappointment through the phone. But when he spoke again, his voice was steady, almost resigned. I understand, Jess. I really do. I just wish things had turned out differently. Me too, she whispered, feeling a tear slip down her cheek despite her best efforts to stay strong. The call ended, and Jessica sat there in silence, the weight of the conversation settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had made the right decision, she knew that. But that didn't make it easier. She had let go of a part of her past, and with it, she had to let go of the possibility of a future she had once dreamed of. She walked to the kitchen and set the table for one. As she sat down to her meal, the food felt different. There was no longer a sense of comfort in it. Instead, it felt like a symbol of the new life she was building for herself, a life that didn't rely on anyone else's approval or support. It was a life where she had to take ownership of her own health, emotionally, mentally, and physically. With a deep breath, she picked up her fork and took a bite. As she chewed, Jessica felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just moving forward in terms of food and nutrition. She was moving forward in life. She was embracing the new journey, the one that was leading her toward better health, a clearer mind, and a future that was entirely her own. She had learned the hardest lesson yet. Sometimes, the most difficult part of moving forward wasn't just letting go of what you couldn't change. It was realizing that you had the power to choose what came next. And as she sat there, her heart heavy yet full, Jessica knew that she was ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready for the next chapter of her life, on her own terms. The following days after the emotional conversation with Carl were a whirlwind. Jessica felt as though she had navigated a great storm and now stood in a calm, although still a bit shaken. She had made the hard decision, one that came with its share of pain and relief. But as she moved through her daily routine, the weight of the decision seemed to lessen. It wasn't about never looking back, but about accepting the fact that her journey had taken a different course. One that she was finally ready to embrace. The morning after the call, Jessica woke up to the warm sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. She stretched, feeling the familiar aches in her body, but also a new energy, a quiet, steady energy that had been slowly returning over the last few weeks. The changes she had made in her diet, the ones that had felt so foreign at first, were beginning to feel more like second nature. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at her reflection. It was the same face, the same eyes, but there was something different in her gaze. A quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. As she studied her own reflection, Jessica realized how far she had come, not just in terms of her health, but in how she saw herself. She had been through so much, and yet, she was still here. Still standing. Still fighting. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Sarah. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in. How are you feeling? Are you still sticking to your healthy plan?" Jessica smiled at the text. Sarah had been a rock for her during the toughest times. Her daughter's encouragement had been unwavering, and Jessica appreciated it more than she could express. "Maybe I'm not as alone as I sometimes think," she mused as she typed her reply. "I'm feeling good. Really good, actually. I'm sticking to the changes, and I think they're working. It's not easy, but I can feel the difference in my energy and my mind. Thanks for always believing in me, sweetie." Sarah's response came almost immediately. "You're amazing, Mom. I'm so proud of you. Keep going. You've got this." With that text, Jessica felt a warmth spread through her chest. The small, everyday affirmations she received from her loved ones, especially Sarah, gave her strength. They reminded her that the changes she was making weren't just for herself, they were for everyone who loved and cared about her. And perhaps, even for those she hadn't met yet. The next few weeks were a mix of triumph and struggle. Jessica found herself cooking more than ever, experimenting with new foods, and continuing to explore the world of healthy nuts that she had once been so skeptical about. She added walnuts back into her diet after realizing that the alternatives had provided her with good results, but something in her needed the familiar. She could balance both. Slowly, Jessica began to enjoy her meals with a deeper appreciation. It wasn't about simply eating for nourishment anymore. It was about honoring her body and what it needed to thrive. One evening, as she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, Jessica took a moment to reflect on the journey she had been on. It had been a long road to get to this place of peace. But it wasn't just about the diet anymore. It wasn't even just about the food. It was about taking responsibility for her life, for her health, and for her future. She had been in the driver's seat all along, even when it felt like she was being swept along by the currents of her past decisions. By choosing to prioritize her health, she had made the conscious decision to put herself first, something she had struggled with for so long. Jessica knew she hadn't completely fixed everything. She hadn't become perfect overnight. But what she had done was make peace with herself. She had accepted the fact that life wasn't about reaching some unattainable state of perfection. It was about choosing every day to be better than yesterday. It was about listening to her body and making choices that reflected her values and her desires. And that was enough. As the days grew longer and the weather warmer, Jessica noticed more subtle changes. She could focus for longer periods. Her memory wasn't as foggy, and she found herself feeling more motivated to take on new projects. She was rediscovering passions she had long forgotten. There was a lightness in her step, a kind of quiet contentment that made the world seem a little brighter, a little easier to navigate. But there were still moments when the road felt tough. There were still days when the temptation to slip into old habits whispered in the back of her mind. There were nights when she would crave the crunch of a familiar snack, the comfort of something that she knew would give her a quick sense of satisfaction. But now, when those cravings arose, Jessica didn't panic. She didn't feel like she was failing. Instead, she chose to be kind to herself, to take a moment to assess what she truly needed. And that was another lesson she had learned: self-compassion was just as important as the choices she made. Her journey wasn't about perfection, it was about consistency. It was about understanding that every decision, every moment, was an opportunity for growth. One afternoon, Jessica decided to visit Dr. Heller for a follow-up appointment. She walked into his office with a sense of pride that she hadn't felt in a long time. The changes she had made, the challenges she had faced, and the emotional roller coaster she had endured, it all led to this moment. She had learned how to listen to her body and trust that it knew what it needed. Dr. Heller greeted her with his usual warm smile. "Jessica. It's great to see you again. How have you been feeling?" Jessica sat down, her eyes bright with confidence. "I've been feeling really good, actually. I've been sticking with the changes, and I feel more energy, more focus. I can honestly say I'm feeling like myself again." He nodded, clearly pleased. "That's fantastic, Jessica. I knew you had it in you. And it sounds like you've really taken the time to understand what your body needs." "I have," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that it's not about being perfect. It's about taking care of myself in a way that works for me, day by day." Dr. Heller chuckled. "Exactly. And it's about patience. Health is a lifelong journey. You're on the right track." As she left Dr. Heller's office, Jessica felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had made it through the toughest parts. She had confronted her fears, her emotions, and her doubts. And now, she was reaping the rewards of her hard work. With every day that passed, Jessica realized more and more that the power to heal, to grow, and to change had always been in her hands. She had always been the one in control. And from now on, she would live every day with that truth in mind. The months slipped by in a series of quiet victories for Jessica. It wasn't always easy, and there were days when she faltered, days when the weight of her past, her doubts, and her anxieties felt like too much to carry. But each time she stumbled, she found the strength to rise again. Every setback became a lesson, every challenge an opportunity to learn more about herself. Her mornings were now filled with routine, a quiet meditation session to center her mind, followed by a nutrient-packed breakfast of oatmeal with chia seeds, almond butter, and blueberries, brain-boosting foods that fueled her day. It was a small ritual, but one that made a world of difference. By the time she sat down at her desk to work on her freelance projects, Jessica felt calm and focused. She had noticed that the persistent fog in her mind was beginning to lift. She could focus longer, her thoughts clearer and more organized. And even though the work she did was often solitary and demanding, she found satisfaction in the small accomplishments each day brought. It was a slow journey, but one that she felt certain of now. Her afternoons were spent walking through the neighborhood. The walks had become one of her favorite parts of the day, an opportunity to clear her head, breathe fresh air, and appreciate the world around her. Jessica had always loved nature, but since her health journey began, it felt like she was seeing everything in a new light. The vibrant colors of the trees, the sounds of birds chirping, the scent of flowers in bloom, it all felt more vivid. More alive. But there were times when she still had moments of doubt. Late at night, after the quiet had settled over her home, Jessica would sit by the window, looking out at the stars. And in those quiet moments, the questions would creep in again. Am I doing enough? Is it too late to make a difference? And every time, she had to remind herself that the answer was yes. Yes, it was enough. Yes, it wasn't too late. Because change, real change, wasn't about a single moment. It was about every small choice she made along the way. Her thoughts returned to her conversation with Carl, the one she had tried so hard to put behind her. The pain of their separation still lingered, but Jessica had realized that she had to let go of the past to fully embrace the future. The heartache, the mistakes, the regrets, those things couldn't define her anymore. She had a future to build, and it wasn't going to happen if she stayed stuck in what had already been lost. The reminder came from an unexpected source. One evening, as she returned from one of her walks, her phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. I was thinking, Mom, maybe you could come visit me next month. I've been wanting to show you the new art exhibit at the museum, and I think it would be fun to spend the weekend together. The invitation was simple, but it felt like a lifeline. Jessica hadn't been on a trip in years, let alone one where she could simply relax and enjoy herself. A weekend with Sarah was exactly what she needed, a chance to step away from the daily grind and reconnect with the people who mattered most to her. Without hesitation, she typed back, I'd love that. I think it's time to get away for a little while. As she put down her phone, Jessica smiled to herself. The idea of a weekend with Sarah filled her with warmth. It wasn't just about taking a break from her routine, it was a reminder that life was about balance. Even as she worked to improve her health and move forward, it was important to take time for the people and experiences that brought her joy. A few days later, as she packed her suitcase, Jessica felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. There was a renewed sense of hope that came with letting go of the past and embracing the present. She had spent so long trying to fix everything, trying to make up for lost time, but now she understood that it wasn't about perfection. It was about living in the moment, about appreciating what she had and moving forward with intention. The flight to see Sarah was uneventful, but the moment she stepped off the plane and felt the warm air of the city, Jessica couldn't help but smile. She was ready for this new chapter. Ready to see what life had in store. When she arrived at Sarah's apartment, she was greeted with an enthusiastic hug. Mom! I'm so glad you're here. Sarah's face was alight with excitement, and it felt like everything in Jessica's world suddenly came into focus. For the next few days, they explored the city together, visiting the art exhibit, grabbing coffee at a cozy cafe, and laughing over dinner at Sarah's favorite restaurant. It was the kind of trip that reminded Jessica of the simple joys of life, connection, love, and presence. On the last night of her stay, as the two sat together on Sarah's couch, talking about everything and nothing, Jessica realized something that made her heart swell. This trip wasn't just a break, it was a reminder of what truly mattered. The people she loved, the relationships she nurtured, the small moments of happiness and laughter, those were the things that made life worth living. Her health journey had taught her many lessons, but perhaps the most important one was this: life was about balance. It was about making healthy choices but also savoring the moments that brought joy. It wasn't about cutting out everything that didn't align with her goals, it was about embracing everything in moderation and allowing herself to enjoy the fullness of life. As the plane touched down on her return trip, Jessica felt more at peace than she had in months. She knew her journey wasn't over, there would always be more work to do, more challenges to face. But she had learned to trust herself, to trust the process. And for the first time in a long time, she was excited about what the future held. Back at home, life settled into a new rhythm. Jessica felt a sense of comfort in her routine. Something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. There was a sense of stability now, but it wasn't a dull or monotonous kind of stability. It was the kind of comfort that came from knowing exactly what she wanted and what she was working toward. Her days were filled with work, healthy meals, walks, and time spent with those she loved. It was a peaceful existence, but one that also felt alive with possibility. But as always, change had a way of creeping in when you least expected it. One Thursday afternoon, as Jessica was working from home, she received a call that made her heart race in a way that she hadn't felt in months. It was from her former colleague, Nathan, who had been an important part of the creative team back when she worked in advertising. His voice was urgent but excited. "Hey, Jessica, I have something I think you'd be perfect for," he began. "It's a freelance project, and it's right up your alley. I know it's been a while since we've worked together, but the timing is perfect. Would you be interested?" Jessica paused for a moment. Her instinct was to say no. She had worked so hard to create a life that didn't depend on long hours and high-stress deadlines. She had left that world behind for a reason. But Nathan's enthusiasm was infectious, and a part of her, one that had been dormant for so long, began to stir. "I don't know, Nathan." She started, unsure. "I've really been focusing on my health and lifestyle changes, and I don't know if I want to get back into that kind of work." Nathan didn't miss a beat. "I get it, Jessica. But this project is different. It's flexible, and I think it could be a great fit for you. No late nights, no constant pressure, just something creative that you can dive into on your own terms. Think about it." Her mind began to race, and she found herself considering the offer. Could she do this? Could she balance this new opportunity with the life she had worked so hard to build? The truth was, she wasn't sure. But there was something thrilling about the idea of diving back into a creative challenge, something that would push her and make her think in new ways. After a long pause, Jessica finally said, "Okay. Let's talk more about it." Over the next few days, she and Nathan discussed the project in detail. It was a marketing campaign for a new line of sustainable fashion, and Jessica was intrigued by the concept. The creative freedom, the alignment with her values, and the flexibility of the work made it feel different from the projects she had taken on in the past. This wasn't about late nights or unrealistic deadlines. This was about contributing to something meaningful, something she could be proud of. As she sat down to organize her schedule, Jessica couldn't help but feel a little excited. There was a nervousness, too, but it wasn't the crippling kind of anxiety that had once plagued her. This was more of a spark. A quiet thrill at the thought of starting something new, of challenging herself once again. Her first day working on the project was a whirlwind. As soon as she dove into the research and brainstorming sessions, Jessica felt a wave of energy rush over her. The work flowed more easily than she expected, and the creative juices she had once relied on were quickly coming back to life. It was like riding a bike, she thought, something you never really forget. But it wasn't just the work that brought her joy. It was the reminder that she had so much more to offer. She had spent so many months focused on her health journey that she hadn't realized how much she missed the challenges that came with her career. The work she was doing now wasn't about stress or competition. It was about expression, about finding a creative solution to a meaningful project, and about learning how to balance it all with the life she had built. Despite the excitement, Jessica found herself struggling to manage the balancing act. There were moments when the old habits crept in, the long hours, the perfectionism, the constant urge to push herself harder. But she quickly recognized the signs and reminded herself of the lessons she had learned in her health journey. This wasn't about burning out or overextending herself. It was about finding a way to thrive, to be present, and to approach the work with mindfulness. She started setting boundaries. Limits on how many hours she would work each day, and firm rules about taking breaks. As much as the work excited her, Jessica knew she had to protect the healthy lifestyle she had worked so hard to cultivate. The balance was tricky, but she was determined to make it work. As the weeks went on, Jessica grew more comfortable with the rhythm of her new project. The initial nerves faded, replaced by a deep sense of accomplishment. Every milestone she reached with the campaign made her feel more empowered, more confident in her ability to handle both her professional and personal life. And then came the moment that truly cemented her belief in the power of balance. One afternoon, after a particularly productive work session, Jessica received a text from Sarah asking if she wanted to join her for a weekend retreat in the mountains. It was the perfect opportunity for a reset, a chance to get away from everything and spend time with her daughter. But this time, it wasn't just about taking a break, it was about celebrating everything she had worked for, her health, her career, and her relationships. "I think I've earned it," Jessica texted back with a smile. And so, she packed her bags once again, this time with a sense of pride. She had made it. She had found the balance she had been searching for, the harmony between work, health, and relationships. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that, in itself, felt like a victory. As Jessica drove up the winding mountain roads with Sarah by her side, she looked out the window at the sprawling view ahead. The trees stretched out in every direction, and the crisp mountain air filled her lungs. It was peaceful up here, quiet, still, and calm. Everything felt in its right place. She was exactly where she needed to be. The mountain retreat with Sarah had been everything Jessica needed, and more. The fresh air, the silence of the woods, and the time spent away from her usual environment gave her the opportunity to clear her mind and reflect on everything she had accomplished. They spent the weekend hiking, meditating, and enjoying each other's company, but as the retreat came to a close, Jessica found herself returning home with a renewed sense of purpose. Her life had taken on a quiet rhythm, but there was still a sense of unease that lingered beneath the surface, like an itch she couldn't quite scratch. The creative project with Nathan was fulfilling, yes, but there was something deeper she hadn't fully addressed. It wasn't just about work or health, it was about the bigger picture, the long-term vision for her life. What came next? Jessica's phone buzzed as she walked through the door of her apartment, returning from her retreat with Sarah. It was a message from Carl, the friend she tried so hard to keep at a distance. "Hey, Jessica, I know it's been a while, but I've been thinking about you. I hope you're doing well. I've been working on something new, and I wanted to share it with you. No pressure, just thought you might like it." Jessica paused, reading the message twice. The hurt and betrayal of the past still lingered, but she couldn't ignore the pull to see what Carl was working on. She hadn't realized how much she missed his perspective, his creativity, and his energy. Carl had always been someone who pushed her boundaries, who made her think bigger than she ever thought possible. Perhaps, just perhaps, this new project could be a chance for them to reconnect without revisiting old wounds. "Sure, send it over. I'm curious to see what you've been up to," she replied, cautiously. The next morning, Carl's email arrived in her inbox. It was a proposal for a new business venture. A collaboration between them and a few other like-minded creatives. The concept was exciting, they wanted to create a platform that promoted sustainable living, healthy lifestyle habits, and conscious consumerism. The vision was huge, but what struck Jessica was the heart behind it. This was more than just a business idea. It was a movement. It was something that aligned with everything she had been working toward in her own life: health, wellness, and making conscious decisions for the betterment of both her mind and the world around her. She could feel the spark ignite within her. This was the challenge she had been seeking, the purpose she had been searching for. The opportunity to use her skills and passions to make a difference, not just in her own life, but in the lives of others. But there was a deeper question gnawing at her: could she really trust Carl again? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she considered the decision in front of her. She could feel the weight of the past. Their fallout had been difficult, and the emotional wounds had never fully healed. Yet, she had to acknowledge the growth she had experienced. She wasn't the same person she was when they had parted ways. She had learned to prioritize her well-being, to set boundaries, and to trust herself. But could she trust him? Her heart told her there was something to this idea, something bigger than either of them. The question wasn't about revisiting the past. It was about whether they could move forward as two individuals who had grown, learned, and evolved. Jessica had to decide whether she was ready to take that risk. With a deep breath, she typed out her response: "This sounds like something I would love to be a part of. Let's talk more about it." The decision felt like a leap of faith. She had no illusions that things would be easy or without complication, but she was ready. The challenge, the possibility of making a real difference, was too important to ignore. The conversation with Carl that followed was awkward at first. It was clear there was still some unresolved tension between them, but as they discussed the project in more detail, they found common ground. They both wanted to make an impact, and despite the complexities of their past, there was a shared passion that made it impossible to ignore. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The new project began to take shape, and Jessica found herself more engaged than she had been in years. They brought together a small but mighty team of people who were just as passionate about creating change in the world. They brainstormed ideas, researched sustainable practices, and crafted a brand that represented everything they stood for. Every step forward felt like a victory. And yet, there were moments. Moments when Jessica's old fears crept in. She had always struggled with perfectionism, and now, with such an important project on the horizon, it was easy for her to fall into old patterns. She wanted everything to be perfect, every detail to align flawlessly. But as the team began to take shape, Jessica learned an invaluable lesson: perfection was not the goal. Progress was. Every meeting, every brainstorming session, every small step toward launching the platform taught her the power of collaboration and compromise. No one had all the answers. No one was perfect. But together, they were capable of creating something meaningful, something that would have a lasting impact. It wasn't just the project that was changing. Jessica was changing, too. The work, the relationships, the challenges, it was all pushing her to grow in ways she hadn't anticipated. And as the platform began to take shape, she realized that this was it, this was her purpose. But as much as she thrived in the work, Jessica knew that she had to continue to take care of herself. The lessons she had learned about balance, about taking time for herself, prioritizing her health, and setting boundaries, were still at the forefront of her mind. The project was important, but so was her well-being. She had to continue living the life she had built, one filled with health, connection, and mindfulness. And so, Jessica moved forward, determined to build a future where both work and well-being existed in harmony. The lessons of the past had shaped her, but it was the lessons of the present that would propel her into the future. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The launch day of the Sustainable Living platform arrived, and with it, a mix of excitement and nervousness that bubbled in Jessica's chest. It was the culmination of months of work, countless hours of brainstorming, and late-night meetings where every detail was meticulously discussed. The website was live, the social media campaigns were set, and the team was ready to spread the word about their vision for a more conscious, sustainable world. But as much as she believed in the cause, Jessica couldn't shake the anxiety that crept up on her. It wasn't about the project itself, she believed in it wholeheartedly. It was the pressure she had put on herself to make everything perfect. The fear of failure had always been a shadow in her life, lingering just behind her every decision. She had spent so much of her life chasing after perfection, terrified of falling short, that now, even with everything in place, she still couldn't completely let go. What if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't resonate with people the way we hope? What if we fail? Jessica tried to calm herself. She had come so far, grown so much, but there was a lingering voice that still told her she wasn't enough, that she couldn't possibly succeed without everything falling into place perfectly. But then, she remembered something Carl had said during one of their earlier meetings. Perfection isn't the goal, he had told her. Progress is. We do the best we can, and the rest will follow. At the time, Jessica had nodded, agreeing with him, but now, standing on the edge of the platform's launch, she felt the weight of those words more than ever. She was learning to trust the process, to trust that she had done the work, and that whatever happened next, it would be part of the journey. As the day progressed, the notifications from the website started to come in. Traffic was climbing, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Social media engagement soared, and people were beginning to share the platform with their own networks. It was happening. It was real. Jessica could hardly believe it. But despite the initial success, there were still moments when she found herself questioning everything. She had to fight the urge to constantly check analytics, to keep refreshing the page, as if the success of the project could be measured in a single moment of validation. The truth was, it couldn't. Success wasn't something that would come overnight. It would take time, persistence, and growth. And in those moments of doubt, Jessica had to remind herself of something she had learned in her health journey: patience. Growth, whether it was physical, emotional, or professional, was never linear. There would be ups and downs, moments of success and moments of struggle, but each step forward was still progress. As the days turned into weeks, the platform began to take on a life of its own. New users signed up, and the community began to grow. Jessica couldn't help but smile every time she saw someone share the platform on their own social media, or leave a positive comment about the impact it was having on their lives. This was more than just a business, it was a movement. And the movement was gaining momentum. But with that success came new challenges. As the platform grew, so did the responsibilities. Jessica found herself in meetings almost every day, discussing new features, brainstorming content ideas, and working with her team to ensure that everything stayed on track. The workload, while exciting, was also overwhelming at times. It was easy to fall back into old patterns of overworking, of saying yes to every opportunity, of not taking time for herself. One afternoon, while working late into the evening, Jessica found herself staring at her computer screen, feeling a sense of exhaustion she couldn't shake. She had been pushing herself harder than ever, trying to make sure everything was perfect. But somewhere along the way, she had stopped paying attention to the very things that had brought her peace: her health, her time with loved ones, and her own sense of well-being. I can't keep doing this, she thought. And so, she made a decision. It was time to take a step back. It was time to trust the process, to trust her team, and to trust that the platform would continue to grow even if she wasn't constantly at the helm. The next morning, Jessica made a call to Carl and the rest of the team. She explained that she needed to take a day off, to recharge and reset. It was hard to ask for time away, it felt like a luxury she didn't deserve. But as she spoke the words, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Carl was supportive, as always. You've been putting everything into this, Jessica. Taking a break is exactly what you need. We've got it from here. It wasn't easy, but Jessica did what she had been struggling to do for so long. She took a day for herself. She spent the day at the park, enjoying the sunshine, walking without a schedule or a to-do list hanging over her head. She called Sarah, and the two of them talked for hours, catching up and reminiscing about old memories. It was exactly what she needed. The next few days felt different. When Jessica returned to work, she felt refreshed, more energized, and ready to face the challenges ahead. She had learned something valuable during her time off, the importance of self-care. She wasn't superhuman. She couldn't do it all the time. And that was okay. As the weeks continued to pass, Jessica found herself more comfortable with the balance she had worked so hard to create. The project was thriving, but she wasn't sacrificing her well-being in the process. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress, and about trusting that, in time, everything would fall into place. The platform's success didn't come overnight, but it did come. And as it continued to grow, so did Jessica. She wasn't the same person who had started this journey. She had learned to trust herself, to trust others, and to trust the process. And in that trust, Jessica found peace. Despite the ongoing success of the platform, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The project was flourishing, and she was doing everything she could to maintain the momentum, but there was a part of her that still felt unsettled. It wasn't the work itself that bothered her. She was passionate about the mission, but the way she was managing her life outside of the platform. Her health and happiness were becoming secondary again. It wasn't just the long hours, it was the emotional toll that came with trying to keep everything running smoothly. For the first time in a long while, Jessica found herself questioning whether she was truly making the impact she had set out to achieve. She had become so focused on the success of the platform, on the growth of the community, and on meeting every deadline, that she had lost sight of the original vision, to lead by example, to show others that a life rooted in balance, health, and authenticity was the key to true success. But lately, she wasn't sure if she was living that example herself. It had been weeks since she had taken a break, and now that she was back in the grind, the pressure of managing everything was starting to show. Her sleep had been inconsistent, her eating habits were slipping, and she found herself spending more time responding to emails and managing the business than taking time for her own personal well-being. The fear of failure had started to creep back in, but it was less about the project now and more about her ability to manage it all without losing herself in the process. Jessica sat at her desk late one night, staring at her reflection in the screen, her eyes tired and her face worn from the stress of the past few weeks. The glow of the computer screen illuminated the dark room, casting long shadows on the walls. She felt disconnected, detached from the woman she had become during her journey to health and happiness. This wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself. She had set out to build something sustainable, not just for the planet, but for her own life. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, pulling her back into the present. It was Carl. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle, "can we talk for a minute?" Jessica sighed, glancing at the clock. "Of course. What's up?" Carl entered and took a seat on the edge of her desk. He looked at her with concern, noticing the exhaustion in her eyes. He had seen the shift in her over the past few weeks, the way she had become more withdrawn, more stressed. "I've been noticing something," he began. "You're burning the candle at both ends, Jessica. You've been putting so much into the project, but you're neglecting yourself. I can see it, and I think you can feel it too." Jessica frowned. She hadn't realized how much her struggles were showing. "I'm fine, Carl. I'm just busy. There's a lot going on, and I need to make sure everything is running smoothly." Carl leaned forward, his tone soft but firm. "I get it. You've always been dedicated, but you've got to take care of yourself too. We all want this to succeed, but we also want you to be okay. No one can keep up this pace forever. You know that, right?" His words stung, but they also hit home. Jessica had always prided herself on her ability to juggle everything, to manage every task with precision and determination. But deep down, she knew that Carl was right. She had been neglecting herself in the pursuit of perfection, and it was starting to take its toll. "I don't know what to do anymore," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "It feels like I'm losing control. I don't want to let anyone down, but I'm also terrified of losing myself in all of this." Carl placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone. You've built an amazing team, and we're all here for you. If you need help, ask for it. If you need a break, take one. I've seen you work too hard to let it all fall apart because you're running on empty." Jessica sat back in her chair, the weight of Carl's words sinking in. She had always been someone who prided herself on being self-sufficient, on handling everything on her own. But maybe it was time to admit that she couldn't do it all. Maybe it was time to let go of the fear of not being enough, of failing, and start trusting the people around her. She met Carl's gaze, feeling the sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "I needed to hear that." The next day, Jessica made a decision. She took a few days off from work, not to relax and recharge in the way she had before, but to actively work on her emotional and physical health. She reached out to Sarah and invited her to join her for a weekend of yoga and meditation, away from the constant buzz of emails, meetings, and deadlines. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. When she returned to the platform, she had a renewed sense of clarity. The break had done wonders. She was still passionate about the mission of the platform, but now, she knew that she had to balance her dedication with self-care. She couldn't pour from an empty cup, and she realized that the work she did would be better, more impactful, if she was healthy, happy, and grounded. With this new perspective, Jessica began to reevaluate her role within the team. She started delegating more tasks to her trusted colleagues, trusting them to take the reins when she needed to step back. It wasn't easy, but she knew it was necessary for both her well-being and the success of the project. As the days went by, Jessica found herself more at peace with her decisions. She was learning that self-care wasn't selfish, it was a prerequisite for living a fulfilling life. By taking care of herself, she could better take care of the project, her team, and the community they had built. A few months later, the platform's growth had far exceeded their initial expectations. It was thriving, and Jessica had learned to trust herself, her team, and the process. The work was still challenging, but it no longer consumed her. She had found a rhythm that allowed her to live with intention and balance, something she had been searching for all along. The platform had become more than just a business, it had become a movement, one that was rooted in health, wellness, and sustainability. And Jessica had finally found peace, knowing that she had created something meaningful while also taking care of herself along the way. Jessica's decision to find balance and embrace the support of her team had done more than just improve her well-being, it had transformed the way she approached the platform and her role within it. With her renewed energy and focus, she was able to lead with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. The project was no longer just a personal passion, it was now a thriving community that embodied the values of collaboration, health, and sustainability. But it wasn't just about her anymore. Jessica realized that her growth and transformation had begun to inspire those around her. The ripple effect was real, and it was spreading far beyond the walls of her office. Her team members were starting to implement the same principles of self-care and balance in their own lives, leading to improved communication and a more cohesive, productive work environment. There was a noticeable shift in the energy of the company. People were excited, motivated, and, most importantly, invested in the mission they were building together. Jessica couldn't help but feel proud. But with success came new challenges. The platform had reached a tipping point, and with the increased traffic and engagement came growing pains. There were more partnerships to manage, more content to produce, and more people to engage with. Jessica's initial instinct was to take on even more, to push even harder, but this time, she caught herself. She had learned the hard way that the success of the project wasn't just about her, it was about the collective effort of the entire team. And they couldn't succeed if she was running on empty again. Carl, who had been a steady source of support throughout the journey, was the first to notice the shift in Jessica's demeanor. As they sat in one of their weekly meetings, he saw the familiar tension creeping back into her posture. She was overworking again, throwing herself into the project at the expense of her health and happiness. "Hey, Jessica," Carl said, his voice gently cutting through her thoughts. "How are you really doing?" Jessica paused, her fingers hovering over her laptop. She hadn't realized how much she'd been holding in until Carl asked. She felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. She wasn't used to admitting when things weren't going well, but this time, she knew she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I'm tired, Carl," she said softly, looking up from her screen. "I thought I could handle it all, but it's starting to feel like too much again." Carl nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's okay to admit that. You've come so far, but you don't have to carry the weight of it all by yourself. We're a team, remember?" Jessica felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't weakness to ask for help, it was strength. She had learned that the hard way. "I guess I just got caught up in it again. I want everything to be perfect, but I'm realizing that it's not about perfection, it's about progress." Carl smiled. "Exactly. And you've come a long way. The platform's success is a reflection of your hard work and vision, but it's also a reflection of the amazing people you've surrounded yourself with. Don't forget that." Jessica took a deep breath. For the first time in a while, she allowed herself to let go of the constant pressure to be everything to everyone. She knew that if she wanted the platform to succeed in the long term, she needed to take care of herself first and let others share the responsibility. Over the next few weeks, Jessica implemented more balance into her daily routine. She began setting clearer boundaries with her work hours, taking regular breaks, and scheduling time for personal activities that brought her joy, like hiking with Sarah and spending quiet evenings with a good book. She also delegated more tasks to her team, trusting them to take on leadership roles in various aspects of the business. Her decision to embrace self-care and trust her team paid off. The platform continued to grow, but this time, it felt sustainable. Jessica no longer felt like she was constantly running on fumes. Instead, she had the energy to think creatively, to innovate, and to keep pushing forward, without losing sight of what truly mattered. One of the most rewarding moments came when Jessica received a heartfelt message from one of the platform's users. It was a woman named Lisa who had been following the platform's advice on sustainable living and health for months. Lisa wrote about how the platform had not only changed her lifestyle but had also inspired her to start a community garden in her neighborhood. The project had brought people together, and Lisa was now helping others adopt more sustainable practices in their own homes. "I never would have started this if I hadn't found your platform," Lisa wrote. "Your message about balance, health, and sustainability gave me the courage to make a change. I want to thank you for inspiring me." Tears welled in Jessica's eyes as she read the message. It was moments like this that reminded her why she started the platform in the first place, to create lasting change, not just for herself, but for others. Lisa's words were a reminder that the ripple effect wasn't just about growing a business, it was about making a difference in people's lives. As the months went by, Jessica found herself increasingly grateful for the journey she had taken. The platform continued to grow, and she had learned to balance ambition with well-being, passion with patience. But more than that, she had learned that success wasn't just about what you accomplished, it was about who you became along the way. Jessica realized that the true measure of success wasn't in the number of followers or the size of the platform. It was in the way the project had changed her, and in the way it was now changing the lives of others. And as she sat back and looked at the growing community they had built, she couldn't help but smile. The ripple effect was real, and it was just beginning. Jessica's journey had been one of self-discovery, growth, and learning, but even in the midst of success, she knew that every road had its bumps. She had worked hard to get to where she was, building the platform, prioritizing balance, and empowering others. But now, the challenge was taking a new shape. It wasn't the workload that was causing stress anymore, it was the question of whether or not the platform should continue to grow or if it had reached its peak. Jessica found herself at a crossroads, a place where she had to decide what direction to take. Sitting in her office late one evening, surrounded by piles of papers and her glowing laptop screen, Jessica felt a familiar tension in her chest. The platform had grown to a point where it had a loyal, engaged following. People from all over the world were inspired by the message of health, sustainability, and living with intention. But now, there was pressure to expand even further, to reach more people, to get bigger and better. And while that sounded enticing, Jessica wasn't sure it was what she truly wanted anymore. The message had always been clear: balance, health, and sustainability. But somewhere along the way, the idea of expansion had started to overshadow the very principles the platform was built on. She remembered the early days when she was excited not by the idea of growing a business, but by the thought of making a positive impact. It had never been about the number of followers, it was about the quality of the connection and the difference they were making. And yet, here she was, staring at the daunting task of deciding whether to keep pushing for growth or take a step back and focus on deepening the existing community. She was facing a dilemma that felt all too familiar: the pull between ambition and authenticity, the pressure to chase success versus staying true to her values. Carl had noticed Jessica's unease and, once again, made sure to check in. He knocked gently on the door, then walked in, offering a warm smile. "Hey, Jess. Everything okay?" he asked, his eyes soft with concern. Jessica sighed, leaning back in her chair. She hadn't realized how much the decision was weighing on her until now. "I don't know, Carl," she admitted. "I feel like we've reached this point where we could push for something bigger, but I'm not sure if that's what I want anymore." Carl took a seat across from her, looking thoughtful. "What do you mean by bigger?" "I mean, we could expand to new markets, we could get more sponsorships, partner with bigger brands. But, does that align with what we've always stood for? I don't know if I want to get caught up in chasing numbers, in pushing for something that isn't aligned with what brought us here in the first place." Carl nodded, understanding immediately. It's easy to get caught up in that. The world is constantly pushing for growth, for more, for bigger. But you've always talked about the importance of authenticity, of not losing sight of the values that matter. Maybe the real question is, what does success look like for you now? Jessica thought about it. Success had always meant impact, the ability to create meaningful change in people's lives. But now, it seemed like success was being defined by external factors: numbers, followers, partnerships. And that didn't feel right. "I think I've lost sight of the real reason we started this platform," she said quietly. "It wasn't to get bigger or more profitable. It was to help people lead better, healthier lives. I want to continue doing that, but I don't want to sacrifice what we've built just to chase something else." Carl smiled. "That's the Jessica I know. And you're right. The impact is the most important thing. Whether you have 1,000,000 followers or 1,000, as long as the work is making a difference, that's what matters. But it's also okay to grow, just grow with intention." Jessica felt a sense of clarity wash over her. Carl was right. It wasn't about staying stagnant, nor was it about growing for the sake of growth. It was about maintaining the integrity of what she had built while ensuring that any growth was in line with her vision and values. She didn't have to choose between scaling up and staying true to her mission. She could do both, so long as she kept the focus on quality over quantity. The next day, Jessica gathered her team for a meeting. There was an energy in the room, a buzz of anticipation as they all awaited her next move. For the first time in a while, Jessica felt completely grounded. She knew exactly what she wanted to say. "We've come a long way," she began, looking around the room at the faces of the people who had supported her through this entire journey. "We've built something amazing here, and I'm so proud of the impact we've had. But I want to be clear about where we go from here. We don't need to get bigger to make a difference. We need to get better. We need to double down on the values we stand for: health, sustainability, and authenticity. And that means focusing on deepening our community, rather than just chasing growth. She paused, letting her words sink in. We're not going to chase numbers. We're going to focus on building stronger connections with the people who matter, our community. And if that leads to organic growth, then that's great. But we're going to do it on our own terms. Her team exchanged looks of agreement, and Jessica could see the relief in their eyes. They had been feeling the pressure too, the pressure to expand, to grow faster, to do more. But now, they had a clearer sense of direction. They were no longer chasing a vague idea of success. They were focused on their mission, and that made all the difference. Over the next few months, Jessica and her team shifted their focus. They developed deeper relationships with their existing followers, creating more personalized content, offering free workshops, and engaging in one-on-one conversations with their community. The platform grew in a more organic, sustainable way. The partnerships they took on were ones that aligned with their values, companies and organizations that shared the same commitment to health and sustainability. In the process, Jessica found a renewed sense of purpose. The pressure to expand rapidly had faded, and in its place was a sense of fulfillment that came from knowing they were staying true to their mission. The platform wasn't just about the number of people they reached, it was about the depth of their impact. And as Jessica watched the community continue to grow, she realized that sometimes, the best way to move forward was not to push harder, but to stay rooted in what truly mattered. As the months passed, Jessica found herself in a quieter space, both internally and externally. The decision to focus on authenticity over expansion had been a pivotal one, and now, the effects of that decision were beginning to show. The platform was thriving, but in a way that felt more in tune with Jessica's original vision. There were fewer public accolades, less media attention, but there was something deeper happening, something more meaningful. Jessica had always been driven by the need to create change in the world, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't measuring that change by the number of followers or how many brands were jumping at the opportunity to collaborate. Instead, it was about the stories, the real, heartfelt stories of people whose lives were changing because of the platform. People like Emily, a single mother from Oregon, who had reached out to Jessica to thank her for helping her find a new sense of balance in her life. Emily had shared that the platform's message had inspired her to make small but significant changes in her diet, her daily routines, and the way she thought about self-care. Emily wasn't the only one, there were countless others who had sent similar messages of gratitude. The fact that people were finding tangible improvement in their lives because of what Jessica had built gave her more satisfaction than anything else. And yet, as she reflected on the journey, there was still a part of her that couldn't help but wonder about the future. She sat on the balcony of her apartment one late afternoon, watching the sun dip beneath the horizon. The city buzzed below her, the hum of life continuing without her. As she sipped on a cup of herbal tea, she thought back to the early days, when everything had seemed uncertain, when she had been struggling to keep the platform afloat. How far she had come since then. But now, with everything in a more stable place, she found herself at a different kind of crossroads. There was still the temptation to grow, there always would be. The pressure from external sources, from advertisers, from business partners, was constant. They all wanted more. But Jessica realized that what she truly craved now wasn't more attention or more recognition. It was more depth. She wanted to dive deeper into her relationships with her community, continue evolving, and help even more people in a meaningful way. But how? How could she evolve without losing what she had worked so hard to create? Could she expand her mission without getting lost in the rush for recognition and growth? The following week, Jessica decided to attend a seminar on sustainable business practices and the ethics of growth. The event was being hosted by a group of entrepreneurs she admired, individuals who had successfully built businesses with a focus on environmental responsibility and social impact. They weren't the typical corporate giants, they were pioneers who had chosen to build companies that prioritized purpose over profit, values over volume. Walking into the seminar, Jessica felt a sense of peace. The environment was casual yet inspiring, and she immediately noticed the common thread among the attendees: they were all focused on creating positive change, not just making money. It wasn't about outpacing the competition or scaling rapidly. Instead, it was about building a foundation that was sustainable, both for the business and the world. Jessica made her way to a roundtable discussion about aligning business goals with core values. It was there that she met Karen, a founder of a small but successful eco-friendly lifestyle brand that had seen steady growth over the years. Karen's approach to business resonated deeply with Jessica's own feelings of wanting to do good while maintaining balance. "Tell me about your company," Jessica asked, eager to hear Karen's perspective. Karen smiled warmly. "We've taken a very slow and steady approach. We focus on quality over quantity, and we make sure that every partnership we engage in aligns with our mission. It's not always easy, but it's fulfilling. We don't chase the next big thing. Instead, we concentrate on doing what we're best at, and we build strong, long-term relationships with our customers." Jessica nodded thoughtfully, feeling a sense of clarity begin to take shape. She had always known that it wasn't about being the biggest. It was about being the best at what mattered most. The idea of taking things slow and steady, of fostering deep connections rather than superficial growth, was exactly what she needed to hear. "We're not in a rush to become a massive empire," Karen continued. "And that's a good thing. The slower you grow, the more you can focus on your purpose. The more you can stay true to why you started." Jessica's heart lifted as she absorbed Karen's words. She didn't need to keep pushing for growth at the expense of everything else. The key was intentional growth, focused, purposeful, and driven by the values that had always guided her. That evening, back in her apartment, Jessica felt a renewed sense of peace. The path forward was no longer about choosing between expansion and staying true to her values. It was about finding the balance between the two. She could continue to grow, but she could do so in a way that stayed true to her mission. Her mind raced with ideas. How could she bring even more value to her community while keeping the authenticity of the platform intact? She could offer exclusive resources for members, such as wellness plans, coaching sessions, or in-depth workshops on sustainable living. The idea of creating a more personalized experience for her followers began to take shape, and she felt excited about the possibilities. But even more than that, Jessica knew that the best way to move forward was to continue living by the principles she had championed from the beginning. She could show others that success didn't have to be measured by how fast or how big you grew, but by the difference you made along the way. The next day, Jessica sat down to draft an email to her team, sharing the epiphanies she had experienced during the seminar. She explained her vision for the future, one that was slower, more intentional, and deeply rooted in the values that had defined their journey. It was time to move beyond the pressure to expand quickly and focus on nurturing the community they had already built. "I believe the next chapter for us isn't about chasing numbers," she wrote. "It's about enriching our existing relationships and continuing to provide value to the people who already trust us. We can still grow, but it will be growth with intention." As she clicked send, Jessica smiled, knowing she had made the right decision. The next phase of her journey wasn't about bigger, it was about deeper. And that felt like the truest form of success. Jessica woke up to the soft glow of the morning sun streaming through the blinds, signaling the start of another day. Her mind was buzzing with ideas from the day before, when she had shared her new vision with her team. There was something about the way the team had rallied behind the idea of slower, more intentional growth that made her feel lighter. She had anticipated some resistance. After all, the world was obsessed with the idea of constant progress, of scaling fast. But instead, her team had embraced the idea wholeheartedly. She checked her phone for the morning updates, scrolling through the messages from her community. One message stood out to her from a woman named Sarah, a dedicated follower who had been part of the platform for almost as long as it had been around. "Hi Jessica, I wanted to thank you for the change in direction. I've been following your content for over a year now, and I've noticed a big difference in how I approach life. I used to feel so overwhelmed trying to keep up with the latest trends and hacks, but your message about slowing down and focusing on what truly matters really clicked with me. I'm seeing improvements in my health and mental well-being already. Thank you for reminding me to take it one step at a time." Jessica smiled as she read Sarah's words. This was exactly why she had started the platform in the first place, because she wanted people to find peace in the midst of the noise, to prioritize what truly mattered. It wasn't about the perfect workout or the newest diet fad. It was about making small, consistent changes that added up over time. The more Jessica thought about it, the more she realized that her team's new focus on depth and authenticity had already begun to yield small wins that were leading to big changes. The numbers might not have been skyrocketing, but the quality of engagement was through the roof. People were more connected, more involved, and most importantly, more willing to make lasting changes in their lives. As she prepared to head into the office, Jessica made a mental note to continue celebrating these small wins. It was easy to get caught up in the chase for big milestones, more followers, higher revenue, bigger partnerships, but the true success was in the everyday moments of impact. A follower's life being changed for the better, a small breakthrough in the health journey of a community member, or even just a simple "thank you" from someone who had felt supported, that was the real win. In the office that morning, Jessica had a meeting scheduled with her content team. The conversation was focused on refining the direction of their upcoming campaign. The decision to move away from viral trends and instead center on providing real, valuable content was beginning to pay off. Jessica could see that the team was more energized than ever, and she could sense a shift in the room. "We've all been working on the idea of quality over quantity," Jessica said, standing at the head of the table. "And I can see it in our engagement numbers. More people are staying on our site longer. We're getting more direct messages, more emails. People are really resonating with the deeper content we're putting out." Samantha, the head of content, nodded enthusiastically. "I think we've also found a sweet spot. People want content that speaks to their real, everyday lives. It's not about a 30-day challenge or a quick fix anymore. It's about integrating small, sustainable changes that they can build on for years. It's about meeting people where they are, not where we want them to be." Jessica smiled, grateful for her team's insight. "Exactly. And that's how we make real impact. Not by pushing people into a mold, but by giving them the tools they need to make their own choices, at their own pace." As the meeting went on, ideas started flowing about how they could refine their messaging to continue fostering this deeper connection with their community. They discussed creating more personal stories, sharing behind-the-scenes looks at Jessica's own journey toward balance, and offering practical advice that was easy to implement. One of the new initiatives Jessica was excited about was a "small wins" challenge they were planning to launch. The idea was simple: encourage their followers to share small, positive changes they'd made in their lives, whether it was something as small as drinking an extra glass of water a day or going to bed 30 minutes earlier. The goal was to celebrate progress, no matter how small, and remind everyone that even the smallest steps forward were worth celebrating. Jessica had always believed that people often overlooked the power of small changes. They were looking for instant transformations, for quick fixes, for magic pills. But in reality, lasting change was built on a series of small, consistent actions. The "small wins" challenge was her way of reminding people of this truth. A few weeks later, the "small wins" challenge launched, and the response was overwhelming. Hundreds of followers started sharing their small victories. Some posted about walking for 10 minutes every morning, others about cooking a healthy meal at home instead of ordering takeout. Jessica was thrilled to see the community so engaged, so willing to celebrate each other's successes. What surprised her even more was how much the "small wins" challenge had impacted her own life. Seeing all the success stories flooding in from her community had reignited her own motivation. She found herself starting each day by setting one small goal. Something simple, like drinking more water or taking a walk during lunch. It was a reminder that she, too, was on the journey, and she didn't need to have it all figured out. The small wins mattered. One evening, as Jessica scrolled through the challenge posts, she received a message from someone she hadn't heard from in a long time, Emily, the woman from Oregon who had first shared her story about how the platform had helped her find balance. "Hi Jessica," the message began. "I just wanted to thank you again for everything. The Small Wins Challenge really inspired me. I started setting small goals every day, and I've noticed such a difference. I feel more in control, more present with my kids, and just happier. It's like I'm finally living the life I wanted but didn't know how to start. You've helped me realize that it doesn't have to be perfect, and that's such a relief." Jessica felt a lump form in her throat as she read the message. This was why she had started it all. Not for the numbers or the accolades, but for the moments when people like Emily felt empowered to take control of their lives in their own way. As Jessica sat back in her chair, she reflected on how far she had come. The path wasn't always clear, and there were times when it felt like progress was slow. But in the end, the small wins, both hers and the community's, were the moments that truly mattered. Jessica's life had been on a steady upward trajectory for the past few months, but deep down, she knew that the next challenge was going to be more personal. It wasn't about the platform's growth, the small wins, or even the success of her new initiatives. It was about something deeper. It was about the fear of letting go. For years, Jessica had been in control of every aspect of her brand. She had built it from the ground up, invested endless hours of hard work, and shaped it into something that reflected her core values. The platform wasn't just a business to her, it was a representation of her journey, her passion, and her dream to help others. Letting go of even a small part of it felt like a betrayal. But as her platform continued to grow and her team expanded, Jessica realized that it wasn't sustainable for her to continue managing everything on her own. She had already delegated a few responsibilities to her team, but now she faced a new decision. The question loomed large: could she trust her team enough to take the reins on certain aspects of the business? Could she step back without feeling like she was abandoning her creation? One afternoon, as she sat at her desk in the office, Jessica's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Alex, the operations manager who had been with the company since its early days. "Hey, Jess," Alex said, walking into the room with a warm smile. "I wanted to talk to you about something." "Sure, what's on your mind?" Jessica asked, leaning back in her chair. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Alex began. "We've grown a lot, and you've been handling so much for so long. You've built something incredible here, but I can see that you're stretching yourself thin. I think we're at a point where we need to start thinking about how we can support you more. We've got the right team now, and I believe we can take some of the weight off your shoulders. What do you think?" Jessica's heart skipped a beat. She had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. "I don't know, Alex. I've always been the one to make the final decisions, to be in control. I'm just not sure I'm ready to step back." Alex nodded, understanding. "I get it. You've put everything into this, and it's natural to feel that way. But I think you've created something that's bigger than any one person. You don't have to do it all alone anymore. The team is here to support you, and we're all on the same page when it comes to the mission of the platform." Jessica stared at her hands for a moment, processing his words. The thought of letting go, of trusting others with her vision, filled her with a deep sense of vulnerability. She wasn't used to feeling this way. She had always been the one to push forward, to make things happen. The idea of stepping back, even slightly, made her feel like she was losing control. But Alex's words lingered in her mind. It's bigger than any one person. Later that evening, Jessica found herself walking through the park near her apartment, trying to clear her head. The cool evening air brushed against her face as she reflected on her conversation with Alex. Letting go didn't mean abandoning her vision, it meant trusting that the foundation she had built was solid enough to stand on its own. She had always known that a business, like any other entity, required growth, evolution, and, yes, delegation. This was just a natural part of that process. Still, the fear gnawed at her. The fear that she might not be able to maintain the same level of involvement, the fear that the platform might lose its essence without her constant oversight. She had always been there, guiding every step, making every decision. Could she truly step back without compromising everything she had worked so hard to build? As Jessica continued walking, she ran into an old friend, Claire, who she hadn't seen in years. Claire had been one of the first people Jessica had confided in when the idea for the platform was still just a dream. Back then, Claire had been a sounding board, offering advice and encouragement when Jessica needed it most. "Jessica!" Claire exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "It's been so long. How have you been?" "I've been good," Jessica said, smiling. "Busy, as usual. How about you?" "I'm doing well," Claire replied. "I've been keeping up with your platform, by the way. It's amazing to see how much it's grown. You've really built something special." "Thanks," Jessica said, her chest swelling with pride. But then, she hesitated. "It's funny, though. I've been feeling a little overwhelmed lately. I've been trying to figure out how to step back a bit, let go of some of the control. I'm just not sure if I'm ready." Claire raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Jessica, you've been running this show for so long. You've worked incredibly hard, and you've built something that has the power to change lives. But it's okay to step back. It doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you trust yourself, and you trust the people you've surrounded yourself with. The platform is a reflection of you, and it will always carry that essence, no matter who's in charge." Jessica paused, considering Claire's words. She knew her friend was right. It wasn't about abandoning the platform, it was about trusting the team she had built, trusting that the values she had instilled in the brand would remain intact, regardless of who was making the decisions. That night, as Jessica lay in bed, she closed her eyes and made a promise to herself: she would take the next step in her journey. It wasn't about relinquishing control, it was about empowering others to help her carry the torch forward. The platform had always been about growth, change, and progress, but the next stage would be different. It would be about letting go of the fear and embracing the possibility of something even greater. The next morning, Jessica sat down with Alex and the team to discuss the next steps. It was time to put her fears aside and trust her team to take on more responsibility. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary for the long-term success of the platform. As she spoke, she could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. "We're going to take this platform to the next level," Jessica said, looking at each team member with a newfound sense of trust. "But it's not about me doing it all. It's about all of us, working together, and staying true to the mission. I'm ready to let go a little. And I'm excited to see where this journey takes us." And just like that, Jessica took her first step toward letting go, and toward a future where her vision would continue to thrive, supported by the team she had built and the community that had believed in her from the start. Jessica sat back in her chair, staring at the open laptop in front of her. The office was unusually quiet today, a stark contrast to the usual hum of activity that came with running a platform like hers. She had taken a step back, officially handing over more responsibilities to her team, and now she was at a crossroads. This was the moment where she could no longer be the person who managed every single detail. She had to redefine her role, embrace a new purpose, and think bigger. But what did that look like? As Jessica sipped her coffee, she reflected on the incredible growth the platform had experienced over the past few years. The Small Wins Challenge had connected her with more people than she ever thought possible. Her team was more dedicated than ever, and the content they were putting out was resonating deeply with their audience. But now, she found herself questioning the next step. Was she ready for the next evolution of her vision? One thing was certain. Her personal journey, her struggles with balance, her fears, and her triumphs, had become a central theme of the platform. People connected with her vulnerability, her honesty, and the raw truth that growth wasn't about perfection. It was about embracing the mess, the struggles, and the small victories that led to transformation. And yet, as the platform grew, Jessica realized she had to look beyond just her own story. She needed to bring in new perspectives, to create a space where others could share their voices, and where the conversation could evolve to include a wider variety of experiences. Maybe this is the next step, she mused aloud, tapping her fingers on the desk. Jessica had always been a believer in the power of community, but now she felt an overwhelming urge to make that community even more interactive and dynamic. She had started with a singular vision of health and wellness, but over time, she saw how people had adapted her ideas into their own unique journeys. This wasn't just her story anymore, it was everyone's story. And now, it was time for the platform to reflect that shift. That afternoon, Jessica met with her team to discuss a bold new direction for the platform. She had spent the morning drafting ideas and gathering inspiration for a fresh initiative. The plan was clear in her mind: they needed to launch a new campaign that focused on collective growth, where the community could come together and share their stories in real time. She imagined it as a movement, something bigger than just another challenge. It would be about building long-lasting habits, tackling challenges, and, most importantly, creating a space where everyone's journey was celebrated. "All right, team," Jessica began as she stood before them, her laptop open to her proposal. "We've had an incredible journey up to this point, but I believe it's time for a new chapter. We're not just focusing on small wins anymore, we're focusing on shared victories. What if we could create a platform where our community doesn't just consume content, but actively participates in shaping the future of the conversation?" The team exchanged curious looks, intrigued but unsure of exactly where this was going. "I want to create something that goes beyond individual goals. I want our platform to be a place where people can share their successes, challenges, and experiences in a collaborative way," Jessica continued. "Instead of just seeing 'I did this' or 'I've accomplished that,' what if we allowed our community to interact with each other's journeys? We'd have stories, we'd have collaborations, and we'd have real conversations. Everyone's voice would matter." There was a pause as the team absorbed her words. Samantha, who had been with the company since its early days, was the first to speak up. "I love this idea," she said, her eyes lighting up. "It's so much bigger than a challenge. It's about building something that's interactive, that fosters real relationships between the people who follow us and each other. If we can get people to share their stories and support each other, it could completely change the way people view health and wellness." Jessica smiled, grateful for the validation. "Exactly. This is about bringing people together, not just telling them what to do. It's about creating a sense of belonging and making everyone feel like they're part of something bigger." Over the next few weeks, the team worked tirelessly to bring Jessica's vision to life. They rebranded the platform to reflect this new direction, incorporating user-generated content, community-led discussions, and weekly collaborative challenges. They created a series of live-streamed events where members could share their journeys in real time, offering advice, encouragement, and support to one another. And they introduced a new feature called Victory Stories, where users could submit stories of their personal growth, regardless of how big or small the wins were. As the campaign launched, Jessica couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. This wasn't just another marketing push or a new series of posts, it was a movement. The community now had the power to shape the narrative, to bring their own experiences into the fold, and to help each other grow in ways they never had before. The first Victory Stories live stream was a huge success. Jessica had been nervous. This was a new venture for the platform, and she wasn't sure how the community would respond. But as the stream went live, she watched in awe as dozens of people joined in, sharing their journeys, their struggles, and their triumphs. It wasn't perfect. Some people stumbled over their words, others spoke from the heart but were clearly emotional, but that was the beauty of it. It was real. It was raw. One woman, Emily, shared how she had struggled with a lifelong battle against body image issues. She spoke about how, for years, she had been chasing a version of herself that didn't align with who she truly was. But through the support of the community, and by committing to the idea of small wins, she had finally started to embrace her body for what it was, rather than what she thought it should be. "I never thought I could feel this confident," Emily said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I'm learning to love myself, step by step. And it's because of this platform, because of the people here, that I've found the courage to keep going." Jessica's heart swelled with pride as she watched Emily share her story. This was what the platform was all about. It wasn't about achieving perfection, it was about embracing each part of the journey, supporting one another, and celebrating the victories, no matter how small. As the weeks went on, the Victory Stories campaign continued to grow. Jessica received messages from people all over the world who had felt inspired by the initiative. The community had come together in a way she had never imagined, and it was clear that this new direction was exactly what they needed. For Jessica, it was a reminder that her vision was bigger than just her own experience. She had built something that wasn't just about her, it was about every person who was brave enough to share their truth, to take one small step forward, and to be part of a movement that celebrated each and every victory. And as the platform grew, Jessica knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. Jessica sat at her desk, staring at the numbers on her screen. The success of the Victory Stories campaign had exceeded her expectations. Engagement was through the roof, and the platform was thriving in ways she hadn't imagined. But with success came new challenges, challenges that she wasn't entirely prepared for. As the platform scaled, it became harder to maintain the same level of personal connection she had once enjoyed with her audience. More importantly, Jessica found herself struggling to balance her time between overseeing the direction of the company and managing her personal life. Her role had shifted dramatically in the past few months. She was no longer the sole person managing everything, now, she was a leader guiding a growing team and community. As much as she loved seeing her vision come to life, there was a constant pressure to keep up with the pace of growth. Her mornings were filled with meetings, her afternoons with planning, and her evenings were spent in the company of spreadsheets and emails. But something was missing. She hadn't had the time to breathe, to reflect on what she had achieved and where she was going. The exhaustion was starting to take its toll on her. It wasn't that she didn't believe in the vision, she did. But as the stakes grew higher, so did her anxiety. Could she continue to lead the platform in a way that felt authentic, or was she losing touch with the very thing that had made it special in the first place? The question haunted her as she walked into the office one Tuesday morning. Her assistant, Ben, met her at the door with a stack of papers. "Morning, Jess," he said, handing her the documents. "I've got the latest reports from the marketing team. They want to discuss a new partnership with a major wellness brand." Jessica took the papers, but her mind was elsewhere. She smiled weakly at Ben and took a seat. "Thanks, Ben. I'll look at these in a bit. Let's set up a meeting with the marketing team later this afternoon." Ben hesitated before speaking again. "Jess, can I talk to you about something? I've noticed you've been pushing yourself pretty hard lately. Is everything okay?" Jessica sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and gratitude. Ben had been with her for years, and he had always been the one to notice when things weren't quite right. "I don't know, Ben," she admitted, rubbing her temples. "I feel like I'm losing control of everything. The platform's growing so fast, and I can't keep up with all the decisions. It's like the more successful we become, the more disconnected I feel from what we're trying to build." Ben nodded sympathetically. "I get it. It's hard to scale without losing the personal touch. But I think the team has got your back. You don't have to do it all on your own anymore." Jessica paused, considering his words. She knew he was right. It was time to lean on her team more than ever, but that was a hard pill to swallow. For so long, she had been the one who did it all. Trusting others with the vision, her vision, was easier said than done. Later that afternoon, Jessica sat in a meeting with the marketing team, listening to their pitch for the partnership. The proposal was compelling, a collaboration with a well-known wellness brand that could potentially take the platform's reach to the next level. It was the kind of opportunity Jessica had dreamed of when she first started the business. But as the team discussed the details, Jessica felt an overwhelming sense of doubt. "I'm not sure," she interjected, cutting through the conversation. "Do we really need to partner with a brand? I mean, we've built something unique, and I'm not sure a commercial partnership is the right direction for us." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at her, sensing her hesitation. "I get that it's a huge opportunity," Jessica continued, her voice more measured now. "But we've always been about authenticity, about empowering our community. What if we lose that by teaming up with a big brand? I don't want us to become just another business trying to cash in on health and wellness trends." One of the marketing team members, Elena, spoke up. "I totally understand where you're coming from, Jess. But this partnership could help us reach so many more people. We could bring more resources to the platform, make it easier to offer the kind of support we've always dreamed of." Jessica paused, torn between the opportunity and her core values. She had built the platform on the idea that it wasn't about making money, it was about making a real impact. Could she maintain that mission if they partnered with a large corporation? After a few moments, she spoke again. "I think we need to take a step back and think about what this partnership really means. Yes, the financial benefits are clear, but we can't lose sight of the heart of what we're doing. We need to be strategic about the companies we align ourselves with. If we move forward, I want to ensure that our community remains at the center of everything." The room nodded in agreement, and the conversation shifted to how they could ensure that the partnership was aligned with the platform's mission. Jessica felt a sense of relief. She wasn't abandoning her values for the sake of success. She was just approaching it in a more measured, thoughtful way. That evening, Jessica sat down in her apartment, staring at the quiet city outside her window. She had made it through another busy day, but the question still lingered in her mind: was this the right path? The platform was thriving, but at what cost? As she thought about everything, she realized that the true challenge wasn't the partnerships or the rapid growth. It was maintaining the vision while scaling. It was finding a way to stay true to herself, to stay connected with the community, and to remain authentic in a world that seemed more focused on numbers and metrics than real connections. She had come so far, but now, more than ever, she needed to stay grounded in the values that had started it all. It was easy to get lost in the hustle, to chase after success, but success without meaning wasn't worth pursuing. The next morning, Jessica called a meeting with her core team. She had a decision to make, and she knew that she couldn't face it alone. "I've been thinking a lot about where we're headed," Jessica began. "We've built something incredible, but as we grow, we need to make sure we're staying true to our mission. We can scale, but we can't lose what makes us unique. Our community, our authenticity, that's what's always mattered. So, I want to make sure that every decision we make keeps that at the forefront." The team nodded, their expressions reflecting their understanding of the weight of her words. This wasn't just about growth anymore. It was about growing in the right way, slowly, thoughtfully, and in a way that allowed them to stay connected to their roots. For Jessica, it was a turning point. She had learned that scaling wasn't just about growing bigger, it was about growing smarter. It was about finding balance, trusting her team, and staying true to what mattered most. The days following the meeting with her team felt like a breath of fresh air for Jessica. The decision was made, and now it was time to act. She had realized that scaling the platform didn't mean abandoning the values that had been the foundation of its success. It meant evolving while staying true to those principles. The team was energized, and there was a renewed sense of purpose in the office as everyone worked together on crafting the platform's next phase. Jessica knew that it wasn't going to be easy. The pressure to constantly innovate, to always be at the forefront of the conversation in the wellness space, was unrelenting. But the commitment to authenticity, to empowering the community, would be her anchor. The focus was now on creating sustainable growth, forging partnerships that aligned with their mission, and continuing to elevate the voices of their members. One afternoon, Jessica was sitting in her office, looking through some feedback from the community. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, but there was one in particular that caught her eye. It was from a woman named Kate, who had been following the platform from its early days. "Jessica," the comment began, "I've been following you since the Small Wins Challenge first started. When I first came across your platform, I was struggling with my health and my mental well-being. But reading your posts and watching the community grow helped me find my voice again. I started making small changes, one step at a time. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And now, I'm not only healthier, but I've also built deeper relationships with the people around me. Thank you for creating this space. I finally feel like I belong." The words hit Jessica hard. Kate's story was just one of many, but it summed up everything Jessica had been working toward. The impact wasn't about the numbers or the fame, it was about the real, tangible changes in people's lives. That was the true measure of success. Jessica leaned back in her chair, her heart swelling with pride. She had started this journey with a single idea, to create a space where people could share their growth. But now, it had become something much larger. It had become a movement, a community bound not by perfection but by their collective efforts to move forward. She thought back to the early days of the platform, the late nights, the doubts, the struggles. It had all felt so uncertain, so fragile at times. But here they were, on the precipice of something much bigger. The team had grown. The platform had expanded. And yet, despite the growth, Jessica knew one thing for sure: the heart of the platform, the community, was still the same. As the platform evolved, Jessica found herself taking a step back, allowing others to take on more leadership roles. It was a difficult adjustment, but it was necessary. She had always been the one in control, but now, she had to trust her team to carry the torch. They were ready for it, and she knew they had the same passion and commitment that had driven her from the very beginning. In the months that followed, Jessica focused on her personal growth as well. She took time to reconnect with the things that mattered most: her family, her friends, and her own well-being. The success of the platform had always been tied to her sense of purpose, but she had learned that she couldn't give from an empty cup. She had to prioritize herself in order to continue leading effectively. One evening, after spending time with her family, Jessica sat down to reflect on everything she had accomplished. The journey had been long, and at times, it had felt like an uphill battle. But she had grown, not just as a businesswoman, but as a person. She had learned that success wasn't about doing everything perfectly. It was about being authentic, trusting others, and learning to let go of control. As she looked back on the platform's growth, Jessica realized that her greatest accomplishment wasn't the brand, the partnerships, or even the community, it was the people who had found themselves through it. The stories, the transformations, and the connections were what truly mattered. And that was a legacy she could be proud of. The sun was setting outside, casting a warm glow over the city. Jessica sat in silence, taking it all in. She had built something meaningful, something that would continue to grow long after she was gone. She had found a way to make her mark, not just through her own success, but through the success of others. Jessica knew there would always be challenges ahead. The wellness industry was ever evolving, and new trends would come and go. But she also knew that the foundation she had built was strong, strong enough to weather whatever storm might come. And more importantly, the platform wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever shared their journey, their wins, their stories. It was a collective effort, and that was its strength. She stood up, walked over to the window, and gazed out at the skyline. There was still so much to do, so much to achieve. But for the first time in a long while, Jessica felt at peace. She had built something that mattered, something that had the power to change lives. And as long as she stayed true to herself and the people who had supported her along the way, she knew the future would be bright. With a sense of calm determination, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?